Hi, welcome back to it. All right, so I want to talk about this whole idea of a broken system, a broken government. I hear it all the time from a lot of politicians, from a lot of pundits. It's the same thing I heard regarding the immigration system, and I went through this on a previous show about the idea that the immigration system is broken. It's not. It's not broken. You're just not implementing it. You're not actually following it. And that made me think of the same thing when people keep saying that the system is broken, this government, this system, it's broken. You have Chris Hayes, who just argued that it's the Constitution's fault that we have this possibility of a debt ceiling bump, that we bump up against the debt ceiling, that it's a fatal flaw within the Constitution. It's broken. Everything's broken. And I hear from the left and many others, even on the right, I hear about them talking about the dysfunction of the federal government, how paralyzed it is, how broken it is. And I wonder what it's broken about. What's broken about it? I don't get it. Is it broken? Is the system broken? Or are the people involved in it broken? Is the system broken, or are the people involved just not following what the system actually is? Because with all this stuff and all this blabber that comes from the president, from the pundits, from the politicians, I gotta say, with all this dysfunction in the federal government, is this not a case for stripping power from the federal government and bringing it back to the states? This is a point I made last week when I went to power going back to the states. All this dysfunction and this craziness about the budget battle and the debt ceiling, is this not a great argument to return a lot of the power back to the states so we don't have this crap? So we don't have to worry about this stuff? Really? The whole idea of not putting all our eggs in one basket in the federal government? I think it's a pretty good argument for it. But the system apparently is broken. Washington is broken. It's not broken. It's not broken. This is not the first time we've had an impasse, first of all. And this is not the worst impasse we've had. I don't know if you remember the Civil War. Anybody remember that? Civil War? Pretty big, kind of huge. A lot of people died. That was a pretty big impasse. I don't think we're at that point. They had, in that same time period, there was a Republican who was almost beaten to death in the floor of the Senate because he was arguing against slavery. That's a pretty big impasse, I would say, and I don't see that happening either. This is not new, this kind of impasse, this kind of political brinksmanship or political disagreement or whatever you want to call it. This is not something new. The system is not broken. Let me put it to you this way. Let's take an example. If I go out and buy a blender and I throw a whole box of cake batter in there, cardboard and all, just throw the whole thing in there, cardboard, everything, box, plastic, and I hit liquefy on that sucker, what's the result of that? Yeah. There's going to be a mess everywhere. There's going to be cake powder all over the kitchen. That's delicious. It sounds really... No, there's no eggs or water. It's just powder. I cover myself.
Pretty hungry.
I'm not making a cake. The result is a total huge mess. Your kitchen's a disaster.
On a separate note, can we make a cake after the show?
Yeah, we can make a freaking cake. Terrible. This is why we didn't give you a mic.
Now I got one. It's all over.
Now we're getting rid of the football picks. I'm going to take away John's mic. So I take that huge mess and the powder and the cardboard and the plastic in my blender, and I just leave it there. And I expect it to bake, but nothing happens. Nothing happens. So then I take that blender back to the store, covered in cake powder, and I drop it on the counter in disgust and frustration, and I say, I let the batter sit there for a whole day, and I have no cake. I'll have to shut down the birthday party because the blender's clearly broken, doesn't work. They'd look at me like an idiot, as they should. They'd look at me like an idiot because that's not how you use the blender. Clearly, you're not using the blender correctly, and so your results are not exactly ideal. They will tell me something like, there's an instruction manual for it to tell you how to use it. It's only supposed to do certain things. Perhaps you should read up on the instruction manual, sir. I think that sounds pretty reasonable. And then they would look at me like an idiot and probably have me escorted out, as they should. Maybe I should figure out how to use it properly before I actually try to use it. See, we would look at somebody who did that with cake batter and a blender. We would look at somebody like that as an absolute idiot. They would be just a moron. So how is it that when the politicians use the government for purposes that it was never supposed to be used for, while completely disregarding the owner's manual, which is the Constitution, how is it that we look at them like they're our heroes or something, and that we're even mildly surprised by the terrible results that happen? How is that? We look at the blender guy like he's a complete idiot. Why do we not look at the politicians the same way? Because we understand how a blender works. You inherently already know a blender doesn't work like that, so the story sounds ridiculous. But when I say that the House of Representatives is going to hold up budgetary issues because it's constitutional and it could force a government slim down, because we have a budget that has so many items in it that were never intended to be passed on a federal level, that are completely unconstitutional, and that are driving up a debt that we can't sustain, that is probably too high already. When I tell you that, it's not inherently already known that that's ridiculous. We know how a blender works. We don't know how the government works. We know the instruction manual for a blender. We don't know the Constitution. The system is not broken. The people who were supposed to use the system and the people that were supposed to watch them to make sure that they use the system properly, we are broken. We don't know our owner's manual anymore. We take the blender out and we throw a bunch of crap in it and we press liquefy, and we expect it to work miracles because we don't know how it's supposed to work. We try to get the blender to bake the cake, to add everything else into it. No. The blender's only supposed to do certain things. The blender doesn't bake the cake. The federal government is only supposed to do certain things. The rest of those responsibilities lie with us and with our states and us as a people and a society. The federal government is very constrained. It's only supposed to do one thing. The blender is only supposed to do one thing. It blends. That's all it does. It's very useful. It can be very handy, and it's very good at what it does. But it's only supposed to do that one thing. The federal government is very useful. It's very good at what it does when it does what it's supposed to do. But it's only supposed to do a certain amount of things. The system is not broken. We have forgotten the system. We have strayed from the system. We do not use the system anymore because we don't know the system, and we don't hold accountable those people who abuse the system because we don't know the system. We don't know the instruction manual. We don't know the Constitution. Eventually, at some point, the milk crate is going to turn into a very, very long series in which I'm going to go through every aspect of the Constitution and explain what it means, why it was put in there, and what it does in the federal government. It's going to be a very long series that I have to do a lot of research for, so it's a little bit down the road, but eventually it is coming. Now, I started thinking about the Constitution and the founders. I just got a new iPhone case. I already had an iPhone case that had the beginning of the Constitution on it, big "We the People," and then the first few lines. It's a really cool iPhone case. But I just got another one, and it's a picture. It's a really cool picture of the founders signing the Declaration. It's awesome. Love this case. So the day that I got it was actually Friday. So I'm waiting for a train, and I was thinking, because this is what I think about when I wait for trains and I'm on my free time. I think about the founders, the Declaration of Independence, and political arguments. That is my life. So I'm thinking about them, and something hit me as to why I think they're so incredible, why I look up to them so much, why I value them so much, and why I refer to them so much. It's not because they thought they were the smartest. It's not because they thought they were the wisest or the most pious or any of that. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's because they knew they weren't. Remember that quote I gave you earlier? The foolish man brags about what he does know, but the wise man admits what he does not. The founders were the wise men. Look at the system they set up. Look at the Constitution. It was separated and divided in such a way that no one could rule over all. No one branch could dictate anything, or everything, really. You had to have branches working together. They withheld power from the federal government. only giving it certain things it could do, making it the blender. They purposefully set out to separate the legislative, the executive, and the judicial to make sure that no one branch could be too powerful. But who was the federal government in that time? It was them. They were the federal government. They withheld power from themselves. They were the ones who wrote the Declaration and eventually the Constitution. Who do you think was going to be in power? They were. They knew that. They were the ones that created the system. They were the ones that were the most popular. Washington was so well known and so trusted in that day and age. There was no way he wasn't going to be the first president. They knew that. They knew he was going to appoint certain people within that constitutional convention to be within the government, to hold powerful places in the government. They knew they were going to be the ones in power. And yet, they limited power for themselves. They withheld power from themselves in the federal government. They knew directly who would be involved, and they still set up a system that constrained power. And we talk about them limiting power of the federal government as if it's this faceless, kind of nameless apparatus. But back in their time, it wasn't. The face of the government was them. The name of the government, the names in the government, it was them. And they specifically set up a system that took power away from themselves, separated it to isolate power, and segment it so that no one else could have too much. That is why they are amazing. That is why I look up to them so much. Not because they thought they knew everything and they were going to do everything perfectly, but because they knew they wouldn't. And they set up a system to safeguard that, even within their own members. That's why I have them on my iPhone. That's why I look up to them so much. That's why I keep pointing to them. They were wise about it. I think we should try and get a little bit of that wisdom back.